February 9th in the year of our Lord 2023. I have been in broadcast since 1990, and I have never seen anything like Syria and Turkey. And I remember the Sri Lankan tsunami in 2004, and we saw the aftermath, sort of. We saw the wreckage, we saw the refugee centers, we saw the movie eventually. And of course, during Haiti's 2010 earthquake, our hearts were touched. I have never seen anything like this. And I think it's because the development of the cities in which this 7.8 followed by a 7.5 earthquake separated by 10 hours occurred in Turkey. We don't really have the same number of images from Syria, has now fully revealed the extent of, it's like Armageddon. And there are some amazing stories this morning. I would begin by urging you, as the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I did yesterday, to help Food for the Poor because I trust them. And our friend Tom Tradup got organized with them on Monday on a call, on Sunday on a call, actually. And we were up and running by Wednesday. When did it hit? Hit Monday. So we talked to him on Tuesday night or Monday night and said, we can put this together. So if you text my name, Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 91999, you can make a contribution that way. And they'll ask you, how much to contribute. I think it's easier and faster to go to the web, hughhewitt.com. And at the very top, it says Help Turkey and Syria. And a lot of people have opened up accounts, and God bless them all if they're doing good work. The one I trust is Food for the Poor, simply because they've been doing it for 70 years, begun by Catholic priests in Central America, now non-denominational, spread all over the world. They have partners here, there, and everywhere. And I don't really know what these, but they're going to freeze to death too. The part of the problem is not just the heartbreaking images of collapsed buildings, 60,000 buildings in Turkey collapsed, but the idea that there's no electricity or water or sanitation, and it's 17 degrees there. There is a little bit of good news amid all the headlines. Millions suffer cold and grief after catastrophic quake, awaiting help, says the New York Times. Anger and despair in Turkey as the death toll from the quakes crossed 15,000 in the Washington Post. Under Turkey's earthquake wreckage, voices go silent. Eerie story about the searchers have to stop every 10 minutes so they can hear tapping or cries for help. In devastated Turkey, rescuers battle cold concrete to save those trapped by quake. This is a story from the Times of Israel, which has really got the best coverage, I think, because it's so much earlier in the morning there, and they are following the Israeli rescue teams around. The Angelinos have gotten there. Turkey's earthquake-trapped survivors face cold, lonely death. A 72-hour threshold passes. And this is also from the Telegraph in Great Britain. For the hundreds, perhaps thousands still trapped in collapsed apartment buildings, time is running out. The human will to survive may burn strong, but the body fades fast beyond the 72-hour mark, without warmth and sustenance. On the good news side, yesterday there was a baby who had been born, pulled from the wreckage. Adam sent me the story from The Guardian, and it's really remarkable. A newborn baby girl has been pulled alive from the rubble of a home in northern Syria after relatives found her still tied by her umbilical cord to her mother, who died in Monday's massive earthquake. The infant is the sole survivor of her immediate family, the rest of whom were all killed when the 7.8 magnitude earthquake that struck Syria and neighboring Turkey flattened the family home in the rebel-held town of Candayiris, said relative Khalil Sawadi. We heard a voice while we were digging, he told AFP on Tuesday. We cleared the dust and found the baby with the umbilical cord, so we cut it. My cousin took her to the hospital. Video of the rescue went viral on social media. Fetching Mrs. Hugh and I are watching rescue videos because they're the most dramatic things in the world, and they give you hope, but they need every dollar you can spare, and it's not an easy time to raise money because of inflation, because of 50% of Americans feel less. This is something I read in Alice Items this morning right before the show. Half of Americans feel much poorer this year than they did last year. And so it's very tough to raise money, but I believe in the overwhelming generosity of the American people, and Turkey is a NATO ally. Turkey has stood. I'm not a fan of Erdogan. Everyone knows that who listens to this show. Erdogan is turning into a sort of dictator in slow motion. He's way too close to Putin. but the Turks have been our friends for 50 years in NATO, 70 years in NATO. And I've been to Istanbul a couple of times. I've been to Ephesus on a cruise ship. It's one of the marvels of the world. And the Turks are wonderful people wherever you meet them. They're hearty and fun. Until Erdogan came along, they were Israel's greatest ally in the region as well. That's changed with the Abraham Accords, but they're now warming that up and the Israelis being there. But it's just a story that's extraordinary. And there's other news stories this morning, but I'm interested in what your reaction to this is. 1-800-520-1234. Like the Haitian earthquake of 2010 and like the Sri Lankan tsunami of 2004, it's a different order of magnitude, and I think it impacts people. One of the things that it does is put things into perspective. Yesterday, the New York Times made an unfortunate decision to run an in-depth interview with Greta Thunberg. All right? Underneath the Turkey story. They have this 20-year-old oddball activist who doesn't have an agenda, and it's incoherent answers. Incoherent answers. Oh, things are terrible, things are horrible. Everyone in the world is faking it. I'm doing this to raise awareness. I'm doing it for, it's just all about me, 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 me. And written by a journalist who is a devotee of Greta. And God bless Greta. Maybe she'll grow up someday and stop blaming the world for what the world chooses not to believe from a 20-year-old who started saying the same thing at 14 and about whom there's little credibility. But the juxtaposition of Greta Thunberg with this devastation, and that's the only word that comes to mind. I've listened to the Bible on tape with Father Mike, so I know about the plagues, and I have read enough history to know that there have been devastating earthquakes in ancient times that wiped entire. Atlantis is supposed to be under the ocean somewhere because of an earthquake, and I know that California's turn is coming. But if you do a 7.8 in the middle of LA, 11 miles from the ground, this is not going to happen. Because we have building codes here that obviously do not exist in developed countries and in Turkey or Syria. I could not believe it, but it is true. Assad bombed one of the villages where everything collapsed because it's a rebel stronghold. Assad is just the worst human person on the planet. And when Trump ordered him killed and allegedly General Mattis said, we're not going to do that, that's too bad. Because killing him would have been like killing Soleimani. That would have been a good thing. But I wonder if you are uniquely touched by this, because it is, I'm going to paraphrase C.S. Lewis. If we could observe grief, if grief could be seen, the world would be swathed in black. And that's true almost every day. And all of you know that out there. Some of you are driving to the hospital right now to see a loved one who's battling chemo. Some of you are, in fact, in terrible pain this morning, and you're awake in the middle of the night somewhere because you're in terrible pain. So we know that you have grief. But I know that, and we respond to that on an individual basis, and that's why churches cook meals. That's why churches are so important. That's why faith is so important, is to understand suffering has a purpose, but on this scale. Barrett in Texas. Good morning, Barrett. What do you think?
Yeah, Hewitt, are you going to continue kissing up the big pharma and protect them when they vax that baby?
Barrett, thank you very much. God bless you. I think something's wrong with you, Barrett. If you hear me talking about Turkey and taking a child out of the rubble, and you're moved to call and talk about big pharma and vaccinating babies, something's wrong with you. And I just say you get on your knees, go to a church, read the scripture. Something is wrong with you. I do not believe in vaccinating babies. I believe I am vaccinated twice. I've had 3 boosters. I'm fine. I did listen to Nancy Mace yesterday. That's a very sad story. I hope the FDA continues to investigate all such claims. But if that's your reaction, Hewitt's talking about Turkey and pulling a baby with an umbilical cord out of the wreckage. I'll call up and make my anti-vax point. If that's your default, something is wrong with you. That you need to go back and find, why are you alive? What gives you joy? What in the world is wrong with you? Go and pray, because something is wrong with you. 1-800-520-1234. You're welcome to call America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Good morning, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt in Studio West. Michael Duran is one of Washington, D.C.'s finest national security intellectuals, but he's also got a great heart, and he's been covering the Turkey-Syria earthquake like few people. and his Twitter feed. I keep reposting on my own Twitter feed. If you follow me on Twitter, Mike's got about, how many followers does Mike have? 143,000. So I mean, he's got a good following because he's a serious guy. He just posted 2 clips 8 minutes ago. Don't lose hope. This inscription was left on a wall by a 24-year-old man who was pulled out of the rubble 64 hours after the earthquake and he names the city Kahramanmaraş. Miraculous rescues continue. People have been found alive even after 3 days. They did find one tragic thing posted 11 minutes ago. A child was pulled alive from the rubble. Her father had covered her up. He's dead. They have a picture of him. He'd covered her up as the walls fell down, and she lived. She'd been in her father's arms for 3 days. And 12 minutes ago, they published a little girl in Hatay, 5-year-old girl, as cute as can be, like pulling my Genghis Kate out of the rubble, a little 5-year-old girl, and they ask if she wants water, and she said, no, I haven't been examined yet. And she's just beautiful, this beautiful little girl. So they're doing what they can. Erdogan's catching all sorts of grief from his people because it's so overwhelming. What do? You do everything you can, and you basically need Team Recon, Team Rubicon to show up en masse. Deb in Tennessee, what do you think, Deb?
I first want to thank you so much for opening your show. This, I agree, Hugh, is the most devastating thing I've ever seen. And as a deep person of faith, my prayers last night were just for those survivors that are still there, and to see those images of fathers that cannot get their children out of the rubble, it is just,
It breaks your heart because anyone who's got a little child, if you're an adult and you're dead in an earthquake and you're 90 years old, it's sad. If you're a 5-year-old and you've been trapped for 72 hours, it's horrific.
And then to see the little boy that was pulled out smiling and laughing.
Oh, yes.
And oh, my gosh. And
so are you agreeing with, I remember Sri Lanka and I remember Haiti. I think this is worse in terms, because the cameras were out when the second one hit. And it's not just rescue videos. We got all the collapse videos are still coming in. And so it's just so jarring because you realize that the world is a fragile place. And it could happen in Southern California or off the coast of Oregon is actually one of the hot spots as well. And it's going to happen to places around the world. But when you're not structurally sound, the whole thing falls down.
Well, I have 2 questions. Do they, in the aftermath, because I always go to the proactive, okay, what do you do now to avoid such catastrophe? Infrastructure, but then with the rebel situation, trying to get supplies, and isn't this what NATO's for?
Well, no, NATO is actually not a humanitarian alliance, although it is because they are our ally, a military ally. We have bases there, and America will be able to land and is landing aid. Food for the Poor actually has lots of partners there. I was reading the story about their effort. They've got lots of partners on the ground in Turkey already, driving trucks and jeeps full of water. I mean, imagine that you haven't any clean water in 3 days or a blanket, and it's freezing. It's freezing. It's pretty amazing.
When you said 17 degrees, and I'll just end with thank you for mentioning.
It's not me. Thank Tom Tradup and Food for the Poor. I appreciate it. I didn't put it together. Tom Tradup and Food for the Poor got their act together fast, but they've been doing it for years. That banner, thank you, Deb. The banner to help, $5, $50, $5,000, $50,000. It all goes through Food for the Poor. The banner's at the top of HughHewitt.com, or you can text HUGH to 91999. HUGH to 91999 and make a contribution as well. Again, you can trust Food for the Poor. That's why I work with them. I vet the groups I work with. I will not let people onto the air to raise money unless I am confident of their overhead, confident of their integrity, confident of their record, and Food for the Poor in international disaster is my preferred choice. All right, my preferred choice. America, I'm Hugh Hewitt. I'm reading from the Times of Israel. Israeli military search and rescue teams working since the devastating earthquake struck southeastern Turkey earlier this week have so far pulled out 10 Turkish civilians. The IDF Home Front Command delegation began work on Tuesday. A second IDF delegation landed yesterday on the outskirts of the town devastated from the sky. You can see Kahramanmaraş, establishing a field hospital there. They have sent hundreds of tons of equipment, 230 participants, including search and rescue experts, military medics, health ministry doctors, supplies, in 3 days. I'm joined by Ambassador Michael Oren, longtime Israeli ambassador to the United States, who joined us a little bit early because I'm so astonished by Israel's response. I wanted to talk to him. Good morning, Dr. Oren. How are you?
I'm good, Hugh. And we felt that quake here. The lamps in our apartment were shaking back and forth.
I do not know how Israel stands up this kind of a response. Is there an earthquake preparedness drill in Israel like there is in California?
There is not, and I think we're woefully unprepared. We have higher standards than a lot of our neighbors, but from what I know, we could do a lot more. And we are right on that Eurasian-African fault line, the same fault line that Turkey's on. And Syria.
Well, and tell me about this home
archaeological sites here and see how many great civilizations were lost to earthquakes.
Yeah, I brought that up earlier. If anyone reads scripture, they find earthquakes destroying entire cities and countries, and they vanish from history. And of course, Atlantis allegedly is somewhere. But this is biblical, right? Have you ever seen anything like this?
Well, we have. We've seen earthquakes in Nepal, in Haiti. And Israel was there in each case. In each case, we were the first on the ground with a fully equipped field hospital. And I was part of the Nepalese operation in Haiti. I was ambassador during the Haiti operation. We cooperated very strongly with the United States at that time. Actually, we set up our headquarters in the U.S. Embassy in Port-au-Prince, and it was quite an operation. And in Nepal, we actually left the field hospital there. It was still functioning about 2 years later. We are unfortunately very well versed on this. We have a large rescue team. What's interesting about this and what's hopeful is that we're actually finding survivors.
Yeah, 10 of them in the last 2 days.
Don't find survivors. In Miami, in the Miami operation, when the hotel collapsed, that building collapsed in Miami, we didn't find anybody.
Right, and that's, I think, the general rule. I'm glad they just found a baby 11 minutes ago. They found a baby.
Amazing.
And it's amazing. Yeah, and so, but I guess we're going to top 6 figures in fatalities. I also guess that a lot of people are going to die from exposure and lack of food, which is why the Israeli airlift. I'm so stunned. Turkey and Israel have had a bad patch, right? That's what I wanted to talk to you about.
We have, but we've had some reconciliation recently. Erdogan had a meeting with our president, with Isaac Herzog, and there's been back and forth. We have to be very cautious. It's not the first time that Erdogan has reached out and reconciled, and then only to retreat later. But I think this is an important gesture. It's people to people. And also Syria is involved. And the reports that we have offered Syria a significant amount of aid. Syria, of course, denies the report. But during the Syrian civil war, we had an open border policy where casualties from both sides in the war came into Israel, thousands of them, received treatment here. We did not take their pictures. We certainly didn't publish their pictures, and we sent them back, something we really weren't given much credit for in the world. And here we are once again offering aid to Syria, a country that officially at least seeks our destruction.
Do you know that Assad yesterday had his bombers hit northern Syria? One of those. I just can't believe this guy. It's just he and Putin. Although I interviewed Mike Pompeo, who you know well, on Tuesday night at the Nixon Library about his book, Never Give an Inch. And I asked him, who's the most evil man you ever met? I asked that once of Christopher Hitchens, and he said the general who ran Argentina. And he said, that's pretty easy. Xi Jinping has dead eyes. But I would have said Assad, because I just think the guy is unbelievable. His father was the same way, right?
Yeah, his father. The difference is that Assad, the pair, and Assad, the son, is that Assad, the son, supposedly was Western educated. He's an optician, and his wife is sort of a fashion model, and he appears to be sort of nice and friendly and Western oriented, but he is a ruthless, Middle Eastern despot as you get, and whereas his father was just merely ruthless and looked ruthless. So there's something that there's what can I say? I can't say this any more eloquently. There's a creepy factor about him. He's
Oh,
creepy.
yeah. Oh, yeah. So I want to go back to the IDF effort. I've never heard of the Home Defense Command before. They are in charge of this massive airlift. What is that?
So the Home Defense Command was born about the time of the second Lebanon War, 2006, when we suddenly realized that the distinction between the front and the home front had essentially been erased. There is no more home front anymore. The home front is the front. When you have missiles in the hands of Hezbollah, missiles in the hands of Hamas that can hit Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, that's the front. And so the Home Command has become proportionally one of the major branches of the Israeli army. And it's responsible for many, many aspects. Our bomb shelters, for emergency procedures. If, for example, a tunnel opens up in northern Galilee, and we've discovered about 7 or 8 Hezbollah tunnels leading into northern Galilee from southern Lebanon in the south. And so some of our finest commanders go into the home front. And one wing of the home front is this rescue unit. And it's made up of doctors, medical people, nurses, rescue experts, engineers, a lot of engineers. And these are people who, for the most part, are reservists. So they're being called away from their jobs to go off and serve the people of Turkey and save the people of Turkey, hopefully.
Yeah, it's such an astonishing thing to fly from Israel, which is humming. And I mean, you've got your political difficulties. We'll talk about that in a second. Everyone's mad at each other. But all of a sudden, you get called, you jump on an airplane, and you go to this flattened region. I mean, flattened. 60,000 buildings collapsed. I don't even know how you begin. There must be specialists who decide, how do you begin in a city that's flattened to begin to search? And they stop every 10 minutes and they try and listen. But 150 search and rescue experts are doing that from Israel, and I'm just astonished that the world hadn't taken it. The United States hadn't done that yet. We'll get there, but we're not in the region, obviously, and you were ready to go. And I guess Erdogan just said, please send everything you can.
Sure, and we've asked for help for Turkey. In 2010, we had this devastating fire in the Carmel Forest, and we asked Turkey for assistance. And at that time, the relations were really bad. And Erdogan sent assistance. So it has happened. I'm supposed to have all the answers, but I have a question, and that is, the question would be, to what degree, if all, we are using our tunnel detection technology in this rescue. So Israel has been world leader in developing tunnel detection, in which we've shared this technology with your Homeland Security, because you have a great problem with tunnels under your southern border.
Correct. Yeah.
And because we had these terrorist tunnels and we weren't detecting them, so we developed this technology. And it can, hear sound on the ground at quite a depth. And I would imagine that in a rescue operation like this, that technology would be very, very, very useful.
Oh, that's so smart. That is obviously one of the things that you hope they can get there on the ground. All right, Michael, since it's our weekly segment, would you update me, please, on the judicial reform, which I have now become an active participant. Obviously, I don't care about the domestic politics of countries generally. I just want them to be allies of the United States, and I like the rule of law. But I do believe yours is an unusual situation because it's impacting ours. People who are criticizing the Israeli judicial reform in the United States are also in favor of destroying the rule of law in the United States. So I really don't understand how to square these two things up. I think you could reform, as you've said many times, by increasing the participation of the political process and the confirmation of judges. But it does seem to be an issue on which the entire country is riven. Am I right in reading it that way?
Yes, you are. And not a day goes by when some, very well-known jurist comes out and attacks the government's plan. Today it was the former Justice Minister of Canada, Oren, a person for whom I have great personal regard and affection. And he's almost one point at the time was proposed as Israel's president. He's an extraordinary man. He came out and criticized the proposal, saying it would render Israel into a flawed democracy.
That is so extreme. Michael, on Tuesday I taught in the United States the presumption of constitutionality attaches to every statute, but if it is unconstitutional, it falls. The basic law is not a constitution; it's a statute. I do not understand how people think amending a statute is somehow overthrowing the rule of law.
Well, this goes to the core of it, and it goes to the core of it. Who's elected, who's unelected, who's sovereign, who isn't sovereign. Again, we only have two co-equal branches of government instead of three. And the fear is that if you sort of detooth that one, Israel will not be able to chew; it will be able to swallow. Follow that metaphor.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and that's it is a concern. It's my concern, and I come from a place of wanting to preserve judicial review, but also knowing that we have to reform the system, and the system is not sustainable. And the reason is the way the judges are chosen by existing judges, which perpetuates a worldview. And our Supreme Court is stuck around circa 1995. The Knesset has moved on. And the Knesset has moved on significantly to the right. So
you'll remember from your Princeton education, right? You're going to go back to Princeton now and remember Mr. Dooley, who famously said the court follows the election returns. And that's been true broadly in American history with the switch in time that saved the nine in the Great Depression. I think another one is coming. But in Israel, apparently the court doesn't follow the election returns.
On the contrary.
Yeah.
It marches in place. And it's marching into place at a time when, say, the Labor Party ran the state of Israel. So it is that problem. And I've seen it up close. I've seen it in the legislature. And so that was not a sustainable situation. And my great fear, I have another book coming out. You're always promoting my books. You're very nice. I have another one coming out in March called Israel 2048, which is my vision for the future of Israel on its 100th birthday.
Oh.
And you'll like it. It's coming out in English, Hebrew, and Arabic, and at the same time. And there's a chapter there on the need for judicial reform. And I set out all these problems. I wrote this 2 years ago. This is not new. And I thought that...
Well, I'm glad to hear you wrote it 2 years ago. I was feeling very inadequate, Dr. Oren, because, honestly, a book a year is the kind of thing that drives me crazy. You and Chuck Box and Daniel Silva make me crazy. A book a year.
Daniel makes me crazy anyway. He's great. But I have another short story book collection coming out this year. But that's another thing. Let's put that aside. But this is about... I have a section on this where I set out these very issues that are now becoming so... flammable in the state of Israel, and I understood back then that the situation was not sustainable. That if it kept on going, there would be a break between the Knesset and the Supreme Court.
And we're there. I appreciate your joining me early, Michael Oren. Follow him on Twitter, Dr. Michael Oren. Get his new book, which comes out every month. We get a month. We should have Book of the Month Club for Michael Oren, and go to HughHewitt.com to help Turkey. Helps serve Turkey through Food for the Poor over at HughHewitt.com. Stay tuned, America. I'll be right back. Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt in Studio West. The BBC, of course, is on the ground. They always are with their World Service. Here is cut number 33 of BBC Breakfast, which aired a couple of hours ago from Turkey. Cut number 33, please.
The conditions have been really, really difficult. There's a lot going on. Rescue teams are still working. There is still hope. People still do believe. The miracles are still happening. But at the same time, we're really losing that race against time now because we've gone beyond that critical first 72 hours, for which when we know that's when the majority of the lives can still be saved, and the conditions have sort of increased the less likeliness, I guess, that more and more people will survive. I mean, yesterday when we were there, many scenes like this behind us, it was devastating to look into the eyes of many of the people and speak with them. I mean, specifically, I remember one of the people I was talking to who was expressing his pain, a grandfather whose grandchildren were buried underneath some of the rubble. And he was talking about how he was hearing the calls of his grandchildren to him and how he felt so helpless because they were so close, yet so far, and there was absolutely nothing he could do. The situation is becoming more and more difficult in the sense that people... every day that goes on that they still don't have enough shelter or do not have enough food with the cold conditions. The needs are becoming greater. Our concern as an aid organization, Islamic Relief, who are here on the ground, is the sanitation sort of needs now, the illnesses that people are starting to develop.
Let me pause there. This is a relief worker in Turkey talking to the BBC, and they're absolutely right. The reason everything's got to get there, the doctors, the airlift, the field hospitals, the food, the medicine, everything that Food for the Poor is helping. And you can help Food for the Poor if you go to HughHewitt.com and click on the banner, send a contribution. You can text my name, Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 91999 as well. H-U-G-H to 91999. And they're rushing everything you need is because it's freezing. Right, it's 17 degrees, and I'm a wimp. I grew up in Ohio, and I'm a hearty man, and I cannot believe what it must be like to be these relief workers. And they're all saints. They're walking around, in the ubiquitous international sign of a serious person is that they wear the sort of the Lollipop Guild uniform of yellow, black, and blue with stripes around them, so you can spot them and you know they're with an official. They're buzzing around these enormous piles of rubble, and it goes on in every city and every region. It doesn't stop. Here's a little tape. If you're watching on the Salem News Channel, cut number 32. They're rescuing a little girl from a collapsed building. Little bit of hope in the middle of all this disaster. Play roll cut 32, please.
Her şey yerinde. Şimdi şunu da çekeyim, tamam mı? Evet. Eğil şöyle, alacağım ben seni.
Dışarıda herkes seni bekliyor.
Umay, ismini söyle kızım amcaya. Umay'ım benim, hadi gel yavrum. Aferin.
It's just amazing.
Kaydırak gibi.
They're talking this little girl how to slide her way out after 3 days. The horror of being buried alive for 3 days is so awful to me. But I also know that the horror on the top of the ground is the same. Now I'm going to cover the other news. Joe Biden gave a couple of quote interviews yesterday, and Kamala Harris gave a quote interview yesterday, and the Twitter executives got drilled yesterday. I'm going to cover all that in an hour or two. But I do ask you from the bottom of my heart, do what you can. You know, I figure whenever I get to Heaven's Gate, St. Peter's going to say, yeah, the show is okay, but really what we liked about it is when you raise money for people doing good things. So maybe we'll let you in. It doesn't work that way, and you know that's not theologically correct. But the fact of the matter is, I sometimes think 33 years of radio, the most important days are when I ask people like you who are driving to work to stop and send $25 or $100 or $500, or if you can do $50,000, whatever you can do. The reason I trust Food for the Poor is that it gets there. I don't trust pop-ups. I don't trust foreign organizations. I trust Food for the Poor. They've been doing this for 70 years. They have vetted partners. They know how to get it done. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by the former National Security Advisor to President Trump, Ambassador Robert C. O'Brien. Good morning, Mr. Ambassador. Good to talk to you. That's the wrong picture, by the way. I don't know who that Robert O'Brien is, but take that down because that wasn't the real Robert O'Brien. That looked like Groucho Marx, Robert O'Brien. We just put up a picture of you that looked like Groucho Marx.
It could be anything's an improvement here.
Hey, I want to do a number of things with you. First of all, talk to us about Turkey, our relationship with us, and what we're doing right now, or what you think we would be doing had this happened under Donald Trump's watch and you were still in the West Wing office facing the Pennsylvania Avenue.
Well, look, there are some things that are beyond politics, and when we look at the earthquake and the humanitarian disaster that's occurring in both Turkey and Syria, we need to figure out how we can get help to the people that are suffering. And we're all moved by the photos and the videos of babies and toddlers coming out of the rubble. And we need to make sure we're doing everything we can to support the Turkish authorities and even get into Syria, which is a bad regime that we're not friends with, of course. But we need to get humanitarian aid to the people who are suffering from the earthquake. And I'd be moving heaven and earth to get everything we could to these countries as fast as we can.
Now, I'm just curious, how does it work, though? Because I remember Nixon finally had to yell at people and say, send everything that can fly and fill it full of ammunition when the Yom Kippur War was underway. How does the American government engage in this?
Well, you work through it depends on the country. With Turkey, we have bilateral relationships that are strong. Turkey's a NATO member, and so we have an air base called Incirlik in Turkey. There are obviously plenty of big modern airports in Turkey, so we just need to be flying material and rescuers and search dogs and all that sort of thing as quickly as possible into Turkey. It's a little more difficult with Syria because we don't have diplomatic relations with the country. The Assad regime is brutal. We want to make sure that whatever material we send doesn't go to enrich the regime, but goes to the victims of the earthquake. So we can work through the Red Cross, through the Red Crescent, and through the UN, and potentially in some areas through the Turks.
You know, Mr. Ambassador, I went to Ankara with your predecessor, John Bolton, when he had the national security job. I have never been in a more depressing city. It was all concrete. But apparently they don't use rebar in Turkey. Are you surprised that it all fell down this way?
Well, look, this is a problem throughout the world, and especially throughout the developing world. And parts of Turkey are quite modern, and parts are quite old, going back to Roman times. And so, when structures are built on top of other structures and on top of other structures, you don't always get the as we've seen, you don't get the type of resilience that we expect in the building codes here. And there's corruption in those countries, and the building inspections are pretty lax. So. I'm not entirely surprised, but Turkey's a modern country, and I think newer buildings are probably meet the correct criteria for earthquakes. But some of the older stuff is suspect, and unfortunately, a lot of people pay with their lives because of that.
Yeah, you and I are both Angelinos for long parts of our lives, and we know what it's like after. You're just very glad for building codes after one of these. Now, Mr. Ambassador, I'd specifically asked you on when the Chinese balloon was meandering from our missile field to our nuclear subpens. Because the accusation was leveled that this had happened before in the Trump years. So what is your response to that accusation?
Well, we were never briefed on any sort of incursion like this at all during the Trump years. I don't think it happened. And I've pulsed this out to folks like Secretary Pompeo, who was there all 4 years. As you know, I started out the Trump years as a hostage envoy, so I wouldn't have necessarily been tracking balloons. But certainly in the last year and a half of the administration, when I was National Security Advisor, we never had an incident like this. Matt Pottinger, my deputy, who was the senior director for Asia, had never seen it. His successor had been there for 4 years, had never seen it. So we're now hearing that there may have been some minor incursions or flights near our territorial waters. We'll have to see what happens and what comes out. But there was nothing at all of the nature that we saw last week, which was just a humiliation. I mean, the Chinese must take us for absolute chumps to think that they could put this balloon over the country, sail it over, propel it with propellers, manipulate its course, collect intelligence on us with school buses full of equipment, and that we wouldn't do anything.
I am wondering what the Chinese think. I asked Secretary of State Pompeo this on Tuesday night, and you just brought it up. We let this thing from the Aleutian Islands all the way to the Atlantic, and we invented an excuse for not shooting it down. Congressman Zinke said Petroleum County in Montana has less people in it than the entire United States Congress. It could have been brought. Do you doubt for a moment we could have brought it down without any danger to people on the ground?
Oh, we could have brought it down. And look, I think the folks who said we were worried about ranchers in Montana, I think if you did a poll of ranchers in Montana, they would have said we'd take the risk of getting hit to bring that thing down. I mean, they're patriots in Montana. They didn't want that spy balloon sitting over our nuclear sites, collecting intelligence on our second strike capability. And so there's no doubt. But Hugh, it goes back earlier than Montana. It should have been taken down when it crossed into U.S. territorial waters 12 miles off the coast of Alaska. That's when it should have been taken down days earlier. And we'll have to figure out why that didn't happen and what the foul-up was. But we can never let this happen again. And we've got to start taking action against the Chinese that we can take relatively easily right now. And we've got TikTok. People always think about a surveillance balloon. Every phone with TikTok on is like a surveillance balloon in your house. It's collecting on your voice, your passwords, your data, all the most private things in your life. And it's shooting right up to the cloud for the Chinese Communist Party to access anytime it wants to. So we've got to get rid of TikTok.
People don't believe that, but I want you to repeat that. But people don't believe that. But I told the fiance of my son who had TikTok, I said, he's in naval intelligence. You can't have that phone in here. And why not? I said, it just absorbs everything.
People ought to look at the terms of use of TikTok. It gives TikTok access to everything in your phone. So once you put on TikTok, it's like, and they catch you with cat videos and dance videos. And while you're watching that, they're stealing everything off your phone. Every bit of data on your phone, your medical records, your political leanings, your emails. I mean, they've got total access to your phone. It's like Alexa; they can listen in on you. And it really worries me. We all have families who are in the military. Some of them have TikTok. If a war broke out between the U.S. and China, heaven forbid, it would be very easy for the Chinese to geolocate our pilots, our surface warfare officers, all the key folks they need. And think how easy it would be to take them out of their apartments or kidnap them or cause financial problems for them while they're trying to get prepared for war. It's a lot easier to take out a pilot in an apartment building than it is to shoot down his F-35.
I can't emphasize enough so we've got to do obvious things. I mean, we've just got to do obvious things like ban TikTok. Mr. Ambassador, yesterday Microsoft announced that, and you've made this point before, so I want to go back to it, that they are linking up Bing to artificial intelligence. Google stock fell 8%. I'm not asking you to comment on the companies, but it proves that creative destruction of capitalism is amazing and that technology advances. I'm very leery of jumping all over Silicon Valley for fear that we lose that competitive advantage that we have over the Chinese. And so when we see something happen in America, we know the Chinese are now going to try and steal from Microsoft what they just developed, right?
Oh, absolutely. They'll try and steal it. They'll replicate it, and then they'll try and sell it for cheaper or improve on it. So the industrial espionage and the espionage of state secrets by the Chinese is something we've never seen in history. Christopher Wray, our FBI director, says it's the biggest transfer of human wealth in history. What the Chinese have stolen from us. So it's a huge problem. And look, we make it easy. They've got Confucius Institutes at almost every major university in America, or the equivalent. And these institutes are used to bully Chinese expat students, but they're also used for propaganda purposes, but more importantly for the Chinese to spy on our universities where this great innovation is taking place. So we need to protect our universities. We need to protect our great tech companies. And here's the thing. We all have problems with big tech. I mean, we saw the Twitter hearings yesterday. It was terrible what happened. It was horrible with the run-up to the election and how the tech companies censored free speech. But if we get rid of the tech companies, what's left? 10 of the 20 biggest tech companies in the world are in Beijing. If we get rid of our tech companies, we're going to lose our ability to compete in AI and quantum and robotics, all these areas where we need to stay ahead of the Chinese to win the next conflict. And just because we're upset with the free speech issues, we need to deal with those issues on their own and not destroy these companies because of it.
Scalpel, not a nuclear weapon. Scalpel. Coming up after the break, I've got Dan Runde, your friend and mine, coming on to talk about his new book, The American Imperative. I see you blurbed it. He writes in here that China is basically got three big vulnerabilities: demographics, debt, and deceptive business practices, meaning that their demographics are very poorly managed. Their debt is extraordinary and getting larger, but their deceptive business practices, I'm going to press Dan on this, don't strike me as a weakness. It strikes me as a strength, provided we put up with them.
Well, it's only a strength if we allow it. So if we allow them to list their public companies on NASDAQ and on the NYSE and on the commodities exchanges and pretend that their fake numbers are real, we allow them to engage in these practices and suck capital out of America. We're funding the buildup of the PLA Navy and the PLA Air Force. We've got billions of retiree money going to Beijing to build up these companies, which are supposedly dual use. But there's no way to separate if you're helping them develop a civilian airliner and that same company's building fighter jets. The U.S. is subsidizing it. One of the things we did at the end of the Trump administration is we cut off the thrift savings program, the retirement program for our military, which was set to invest in China in some of the very industries that would be used to sink our ships and shoot down our planes. And they'd be using our military veterans and our active duty service members' money to do it. And we cut that off, and we need to do that on a broader scale. The other thing we need to do is we need to stop them from buying farmland. I mean, they're using our money that we invested, and they're coming back here and buying farmland. And the farmland is adjacent to our most critical nuclear sites, our Air Force bases in places like Grand Forks, North Dakota, or Laughlin in Texas. And we're just allowing them to come in and buy this property. Can you imagine the Chinese allowing us, an American company, to come buy thousands of acres next to their most sensitive PLA Air Force bases? Never happened.
Never happened. So let me close where we began, Mr. Ambassador. I've been raising money for Turkish relief via Food for the Poor over at HughHewitt.com. Did you get along well with your counterpart to President Erdogan?
I did. He's a man named Ibrahim Khalil. He taught at George Washington University. He's very committed to Erdogan and the AKP, and we didn't always see eye to eye on policy, that's for sure, but he was a very cordial guy, and we got along well. And look, one of the things, allies aren't perfect, and Turkey's a NATO ally, and I'm a little upset with them at the way they're holding up Finland and Sweden for NATO membership. But it's better to have Turkey as an ally than not as an ally. And so we tried to have good relations with Turkey, notwithstanding the disputes we had. But right now, this earthquake is something that's really beyond politics. We need to do what we can to help the Turkish people, and we need to do it in a way to make sure that the aid that people are volunteering goes to the people and the victims and not to the government.
Amen. Ambassador Robert O'Brien, you're not a doctor. I'm not going to call you a doctor. Ambassador Robert O'Brien, great to have you back, Mr. Ambassador. Keep coming back. Don't go.